We had so much fun on that train. I've been replaying some of the scenes. We got such a great reaction from listeners out there here and on LinkedIn. And I just got to say, the best part of it last week for me was the people we met along the way, the people who interjected on the train.
Interrupted this really fascinating conversation.
Just the fact that we were able to start recording a podcast on one side of the lake and end up on another side of the lake, to me, is just such a novelty. And I hope we get to do it again.
Well, I'm already thinking of other transportation options where we could do this, Todd. And, we have recorded the podcast before in a parking garage after we got stuck after the Technology Alliance annual luncheon. You know what I'd really like to do, and it's not quite here yet in the Seattle area, but it's coming soon. We're going to have to record a podcast in a Waymo.
Oh, brilliant.
I certainly don't want to do it on a Lime scooter with you.
Hi, and welcome to GeekWire. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
John, it's good to see you. You're on a spring break getaway. You're not in the office with me, but it's as if you're next door.
But, of course, I need to be here to record the podcast with you, one of my favorite things to do each week.
All right, well, we are coming to you from Seattle and Palm Springs. What happens here matters everywhere. Every week on this show, we get to talk about some of the most interesting and important stories and trends in the news in the Seattle tech community. And John, I got to say, over the past month or so, we've had some changes on our team, and I've been able to jump in on the startup beat. Traditionally, I've covered Microsoft and then Amazon, and I do a little bit of general assignment stuff. But startups have been your bailiwick since the beginning. And I feel like I'm treading on your territory a little bit here. And I got to say, it's fun. It's fun.
Well, good. I'm glad you're enjoying it so much. What are you liking about it?
Well, I can see connections. Talking to the people who are running these companies. I'll just give you one example, John, before we jump into some of the news. With every single startup founder I've been talking to over the past few weeks, one of the stock questions I ask is, how are you thinking about growing your team? What does it look like to expand and build a business in this new era of AI? And there on the front lines with startups, you can see how AI is directly influencing their decisions about when and how to hire. The comment that one of the startup founders made to me was, hey, we've got employees 1 through 5, and basically employees 6 through 100 are going to be agents. And so it's a different universe. And that is just one example of what you can see when you start talking to people who are building these companies from scratch. But what really opened my eyes this past week was a quarterly report that comes out. I've never covered this before, John. The PitchBook NVCA, which I guess used to stand for National Venture Capital Association. It's a report that comes out.
Doesn't it still stand for that?
I think they might be one of those KFC things where they've totally changed their name, because I was searching for what the acronym stood for, and I had a hard time finding it.
Well, to me, it's still the National Venture Capital Association.
So they come out with a quarterly report, the two of them, PitchBook and NVCA, and it really gives a national look at who's getting funding, which markets are getting funding, what types of companies are raising money, and what types of technologies are bubbling up from the startup ranks. John, you've covered this over the years. I guess it's sort of a quarterly tradition among tech and venture capital reporters to look at this report.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of the Bible of the VC and startup industry, and we've always looked at it to pinpoint trends of what's happening across the ecosystem.
So for the first quarter, the numbers in Seattle were pretty revealing. $1.5 billion across 69 deals. This was the amount of venture funding raised by companies in the Seattle area. Now that might sound like a lot, 1.5 billion across 69 deals, but 69 deals, I did the numbers. I crunched it back about a decade. I should say Claude crunched it back about a decade for me, looking at the spreadsheets. Actually, John, that's one huge advantage that I have that you probably didn't have, obviously, when you were covering this stuff, when you were on the beat. I can just put the spreadsheets into Claude, check it in Gemini, and immediately see a trend and have it produce a chart. At any rate, 69 deals. That is the lowest deal count in the Seattle area since mid-2020. So we're talking 6 years. And the trend that is happening across the nation, and it's also reflected in Seattle, is that you've got some sizable amounts of funding going to a smaller and smaller number of companies. And it does not seem good.
Yeah, it's not great because it is it's the haves and have-nots. I mean, it's concentrating money in a very small group of companies. And so to be a venture-backed startup today means you're raising hundreds of millions of dollars versus those smaller rounds. And the number of deals going down is certainly concerning. One thing that stood out to me was looking at Austin. And Austin had over 100 deals. So this is what concerns me more than, the trend that there's more capital being concentrated in fewer companies is a trend that's been going on for a while. And it's part of the AI boom times because you are seeing some mega rounds for these AI companies. And you're also seeing some additional hardware oriented companies, which is something I think we'll want to talk about as part of this as well. But what concerned me was looking at just the raw number of deals when you see things like 69 in Seattle, but 102 in Austin, Los Angeles, 189 deals, Miami, 100 deals. Seattle is historically punched above its weight in these categories and in comparison to some of these cities. And it feels as if we're no longer doing that. We're maybe regressing as it relates to just the amount of dollars and the deals.
Historically, in terms of the amounts and the numbers of deals, Seattle's typically been in the 6, 7, 8 ranking range in the top 10, and it's
slipping. I recall it at one point it got up maybe as high as like 4th at one point. And this has been the thing. It was like the Seattle area is never going to surpass the Bay Area in terms of deal count or dollars. It's just the epicenter of capital as it relates to venture capital. And so that is unrealistic to say, oh, let's compare ourselves to the Bay Area. But comparing ourselves to some of these other cities like LA or Austin, that is more comparable. And I feel as if the Seattle area is falling behind.
So just to put a fine point on the numbers, Seattle was at 69 deals, as we said, with $1.5 billion raised in the first quarter of 2026. And Miami had 100 deals. New York had 490 deals at $11.4 billion in valuation. And Seattle was 7th in terms of capital raised, 10th in terms of deal count. So the risk there is, you start to fall out of the top 10. That's not a great place to be. And it's almost hard to believe in some ways.
Seattle it's a big company town. It's a big tech company town. And when you look at the history of the Seattle area, companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Expedia, T-Mobile, they're very, very large companies that are anchored in the Seattle area. And in part because of that, we haven't seen as much oxygen going to the startup ecosystem. So you can have a very robust, strong tech ecosystem. And I would argue Seattle is probably top 2 or 3 when you look at the entirety of the tech ecosystem, including all the engineering centers here of companies like Google and Meta and Dropbox and Salesforce, and the list goes on and on. We have a list of over 100 of these on GeekWire. That is a component of the tech ecosystem. The big headquartered companies are a component. And then the startup ecosystem is a component as well, kind of the feeder system of the next big companies. The problem is that that feeder system and the startup ecosystem has always been, it's been good, but it hasn't been great. Like what you've seen with the engineering centers coming here or these very large tech companies anchored here. So where you would say the big tech companies are like either a triple or a home run, I'll put it in baseball terms, and the engineering centers are a triple or home run here, our startup ecosystem is like a base hit single. Todd, it's kind of been there for a little while, maybe during certain components of the last 30 years that we've covered this community. It's maybe gotten to a double. It's maybe gotten to second base.
But in the Zillow era? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, there were a crop of companies that were coming up. And we should say this isn't to discount the amazing, interesting companies because, and hope we'll probably talk about that a little bit later because, I mean, there's still a lot. I mean, there's probably 69 really interesting companies that we can be covering that are emerging here. And as you noted in your story, things like space and robotics and hardware, like there's some cool stuff happening here, but it's just not as robust as it could be. And this is a lot of venture capitalists, a lot of entrepreneurs scratch their heads about this because there is this immense amount of talent here. At some point, they get laid off from big tech companies or they get tired of it. And you would think that they would go and start the next company. And that cycle hasn't been as robust in Seattle for whatever reason. People either leave and start their companies. You think of a company like Twilio, or you go to another big tech company, and so it's been like this for 20, 30 years. And it's just, there's something about the DNA of Seattle that I think is holding up the startup ecosystem from being what it could be. And a lot of people try to jumpstart it. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
So many threads to pull there. Twilio, Jeff Lawson, early AWS employee. I just ran across that and was reminded of that when I was writing about the Amazon Web Services 20th anniversary. But John, to me, the nature of companies is changing as well. And this came through in the example of one of the companies that raised a ton of money, ostensibly based in Seattle. And I've been meaning to write about this. I tucked it into the bottom of the piece. It's not going to preclude me from doing a standalone story on this.
I think it's a good story here. So I'm glad that I saw that it was at the bottom of the piece, and I was glad that you included it.
I think it's called XBOW, I assume, XBOW, unless it's XBOW. It's an autonomous cybersecurity company. It was founded by the GitHub Copilot creator. It raised $120 million in a Series C round that valued it at more than $1 billion. So a new unicorn in the Seattle area, ostensibly. And John, its headquarters is a mailbox at a co-working space in Pioneer Square, the historic Seattle neighborhood. I mean, that is crazy. You've got $1 billion company headquartered in a mailbox. Not for real, but you get what I mean.
There's another cybersecurity company that is ostensibly headquartered in the Seattle area that raised $280 million last year called ChainGuard. They're a completely distributed company. One of the co-founders is in Seattle and they've got a handful of folks here, but they don't really have an office space and they're fully remote. And this is a byproduct of the COVID era where like companies realize they can get talent wherever they want. So I think COVID really changed the dynamic of what it even meant to be a company headquartered someplace.
Yes.
And now you've seen it with the big tech companies that are trying to consolidate, bring people back. But for startups, many of them still are like XBOW or ChainGuard that have employees wherever. And for us, it makes it kind of hard to determine whether they're truly a Seattle company or not.
And then you start to look at that map, the one that you referenced earlier, and it's like, well, wait a second, does this even matter anymore? Does it matter? What does it mean to be a tech hub?
It's changing for sure, but at the end of the day, you would probably want jobs in your community that you're living in so that you have the money and funds to fund your schools, your pools, your police force, so at the end of the day, it does matter. But I think companies are very different in how they're structured, how they think about their workforces, where they're based. And so that is another dynamic here, but it gets back to my original point that like still you see the number of deals in Seattle compared to Austin or LA or Miami, and that's disappointing that we're so far below them now. And that just means the deal flow is slow here and people are looking at funding companies elsewhere. I mean, you look at a venture capital firm like Madrona based in Seattle, long history here, deep roots. They're investing everywhere now. They don't just focus on the Pacific Northwest. So that changes the dynamic too. When one of the top venture capitalists in a community decides they're more global in nature versus hyper local.
Not just to be doom and gloom here. Do you see a way out of this or does it matter? Or like, is there anything to look forward?
It doesn't matter too much if of the 69, and this is an argument you've heard people like Chris DeVore, by the way, who wrote a great guest column for us this week. He's the venture capitalist behind Founders Co-op. So make sure you check that guest post out. But he's argued about this in the past, where if you look at the hit rate of the startups that are created here, they actually create a lot more value in comparison to some of the other regions. And so it doesn't matter if we get 5 mega home runs that are created by Seattle entrepreneurs. And I think there is a case to be made that the quality of entrepreneurs in the Seattle area is very high. There's a deep, deep talent bench here. And typically, one of the stereotypes of Seattle entrepreneurs and Seattle technologies and innovations is that the entrepreneurs here try to solve harder problems and more complex problems that can be much bigger businesses and bigger exits for their investors. And I think that's true, and do so with less capital. So, so it would be based on that, it's a great place to invest. And there's an amazing array of entrepreneurs that operate, and past examples of those types of entrepreneurs as well.
I actually have a few more things to say on this. We're running a little long in this first segment, so I'm going to cut it here. We're going to take a break, come back, talk more. Later on, I do want to talk a little bit about Amazon, and I have a fun GeekWire trivia segment that's a little bit different than what we've done in the past. So stick around for all of that. We'll have more right after this. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop with John Cook. John, another trend that I wanted to talk about along these lines was something that I've noticed in the GeekWire 200, which is our index. And we used to say that it was our index of the region's fastest growing. Did we say fastest growing, or it was kind of a proxy for growth?
Yeah, fastest growing.
Most promising. Most promising. And that is an important change in the language, because I was looking at the latest GeekWire 200, which just came out a few weeks ago. John, do you have any guess for how many of the 200 saw their employment grow and how many saw their employment decline year over year? On our list of the 200 most promising, how many companies saw their employment decline? Let's just go with decline of the 200. Can you come up with a number?
Gosh, this should be the trivia question. This is a good one. Gosh, I would say it's 80 of the 200.
You're close. It's a little less than that. So it's 70 of the latest ones. It's about 35%. 70 of the 200 saw their employment decline year over year. And the median decline was about 7%, if I'm calculating it correctly, with help from Gemini and Claude. If you would have told us 10 years ago that 35% of the GeekWire 200 would see year-over-year employment declines, we would go, what in the heck were they doing on the list in the first place? That doesn't even belong on the list. It's just a sign of how much things have changed. And if anything, it feels like efficiency in terms of employment growth, in terms of headcount, is far more important these days than anything else in terms of ensuring the future of your company.
Well, you need to pay for all those GPUs, right?
Yes.
So it's the GPUs or the employees. And yeah, I think it is a big trend. I mean, there's been a lot of chatter as well about the first billion-dollar unicorn startup that's run by one person. And that's what companies are moving towards and striving towards. So it's not a surprise that we're seeing employment declines. That said, one of the interesting trends that has stood out to me, Todd, in both the report on the venture capital numbers and just what I've noticed and what I've been tracking and seeing around the community, is historically the Seattle area was a software hub,
right,
largely because of Microsoft. Some of the most interesting, most promising companies are building physical hardware and robotics and physical AI. I mean, you think about companies like Overland AI, autonomous vehicles, Carbon Robotics, autonomous vehicles, laser weeding technology in the ag tech space. You think about all the companies, and this is something that came out in your reporting as well, in the space sector. The space sector in the Seattle area is just booming right now. And so you see this concentration and this really big shift to robotics, hardware. And these companies, another company, Brink Drones,
Yep.
they raised a very large round last year, just moved into a new headquarters on the ship canal. And these are companies actually that do need employees because they're actually physically building stuff. And while they are utilizing robotics and their manufacturing capabilities, these are companies that actually need more employees than a traditional AI startup that might need 2 or 3 and have 400 agents or 5,000 agents doing all their work.
So when you look at that roughly 1.5 billion, more than a third of that, to your point, John, was in space startups. Stoke Space in Kent raised $350 million, StarCloud in Redmond, $170 million, and Portal Space Systems in Bothell, $50 million, and they actually ended up with a round of about $61 million. So that's $580 million out of the $1.5 billion in the quarter was from space startups. That was just remarkable to me. And I know this has kind of been a slow burn in terms of this industry in the region. And we've always said, hey, Seattle is always going to be a space hub. And you've got Boeing, you've got Microsoft, the aerospace and the software legacies and the heritage. That's going to come together and really create a booming commercial space industry. Boy, you can really see it now in terms of the startup activity.
Well, and then you look at some of those other big companies like Amazon and Globalstar, which was in the news this week with the satellite business. And you have Blue Origin that is based in the Seattle area as well, Jeff Bezos' space company. So there is a lot of DNA here in that industry, from legacy companies like Boeing and Microsoft to some of the startups that are emerging. Very interesting to see that being such an important part of the startup ecosystem these days.
2 other threads I wanted to pull here before we conclude our startup discussion. There were 2 companies that I found fascinating in terms of the larger trends. Seekout, Anup Gupta, this is an AI recruiting company. People in the Microsoft ecosystem will know Anup. He ran Skype and Exchange, and for a while he was Bill Gates' technical assistant, which is kind of a marquee role behind the scenes at Microsoft. But about 10 years ago, he and one of his colleagues went out and they started in the startup realm, and they ended up building a unicorn, a company with a valuation of more than $1 billion. And that was back in roughly 2022 that they got that valuation. And they then had a series of layoffs as the economy hit the recruiting market, and they cut staff twice. And the story that I wrote about this week was about Anup stepping down at age 67 from the CEO role. They brought in a new CEO with enterprise software experience. But I got to tell you, John, the thing that stuck out to me about that story is Anup told me they've got more than $100 million in the bank out of the funding that they raised. And it just struck me, the position of power that puts them in this new realm where you're able to leverage AI to do so much more with so much less. It just struck me as a kind of an unusual story that this company would have that much in the bank. And I would imagine that their valuation is not as high as it used to be, but just a rare situation. Have you ever seen that before?
Yeah, I have. And it often means that a company can grow into a very, very large company.
Yeah.
So the example I was going to cite was Tableau, which eventually sold to Salesforce, which raised way back in the day. I mean, we're dating ourselves, but they raised like $15 million, I remember, from NEA. And they never really touched the money. They just kind of needed it to
like an endorsement.
Yeah, kind of like, okay, yeah, we're doing really well and revenues are growing and we could be profitable very easily, but let's raise some money so we get it on the books before we go out and go public. But they never really touched their venture capital either. So it's a smart play to not touch your venture capital money and actually grow based on traditional means, which is through revenues that you drive. And the venture capital there is a security blanket, and it's a way to potentially expand when the market changes, and you can buy up your competitors. You can, do all sorts of creative things with that much capital.
And the new CEO, one of the things he told me is that they do plan to do acquisitions. And
there you go.
they're going to be acquiring more in the realm of recruiting companies, and their whole thing with their new technology is they're going to be offering basically outcomes where their in-house recruiters use the AI to deliver you candidates and basically go that way. But it's an M&A strategy and something very similar. There's a Seattle startup called Ambassador that's been around for a while. They just announced their acquisition of an ad platform called Humming, which was at one point the pride of Tacoma, Washington's tech scene, but kind of faded away. And one of the points that Ambassador's CEO, Jeff McDonald, made to me was, you've got all of these AI startups over the past couple of years that have essentially been putting wrappers around the technology from the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic, creating products out of the foundation models, essentially, and not doing a lot of innovation on their own necessarily, except maybe in the front end and the marketing. But you're seeing them, as the big frontier AI companies expand, trying to grow their own markets, you're seeing a lot of these startups struggle and go out of business. And so one thing Ambassador is doing is looking at that as an M&A opportunity. And they're going to try and roll up a lot of these companies that might have done some innovation, had some of the customer data. That was the point that Jeff McDonald from Ambassador made, was that you need data, you need context. It's not enough to just have an interesting idea and build something on the foundation of somebody else's technology. So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. It's been fun to get this different kind of glimpse into the technology world through the lens of these startups.
It's definitely a new era.
And John, I don't have to deal with PR people.
That's one of the reasons why I covered it originally. It's so refreshing.
I got to tell you, when Anoop told me that they had $100 million in the bank, all I could think of the back of my mind was, that's fascinating. And I am so glad that you don't have a PR rep on the line trying to tell me retroactively that that's off the record, because that's an argument that I hate to have. And it was just like one of those crystal clear moments where covering startups is a lot more Wild West and a lot more fun at times as a result.
Absolutely.
I know I'm preaching to the choir on that. Okay, hey, let's talk at least a little bit about Amazon. Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. It's Todd Bishop and John Cook. Amazon's CEO, Andy Jassy, came out with his annual letter last week. And I always appreciate these kinds of letters because they give you, obviously it's something that the company has prepared and it's performative and they're presenting their case to Wall Street, but you can read between the lines in terms of the focus and the direction. But the thing that stuck out to me most was a narrative that runs counter to something that we've said recently about Andy Jassy, which is this idea that as Amazon's CEO, succeeding Jeff Bezos, he's been much more about reining things in, reducing bureaucracy, cutting staff, trying to get Amazon back to a more nimble state, and not really taking the kinds of bold bets that might ensure the company's future. And I think in this letter, we saw at least a couple of examples of where that's not true. And I wanted to point both of those out. The first is, he is saying that it's quite possible that Amazon is going to be going head to head with NVIDIA in some ways. He says that Amazon is considering at least selling racks of its chips to third parties. And this is a business internally, they're basically using their chips internally through AWS that's generating about $20 billion a year in revenue. And his point was, if they started to sell those chips externally, like NVIDIA does, where others could put them in their data centers and use them to run their own AI models and other things, he thinks it would be a business of about $50 billion just at its current footprint. So that was exhibit A for me in terms of how Amazon is at least taking a bit of a bet here.
And classic Amazon.
Yes.
Right? In terms of how they built their cloud computing business, it was very similar concept. They basically built it for their own internal use and then said, hey, we've got something here we can spin out to the entire ecosystem. So that's what strikes me there.
Completely. That is the classic Amazon playbook. And then he mentioned that specifically as it relates to robotics as well. Of course, Amazon has long made its own robots for its own internal use, largely in its fulfillment centers. And he is saying that they are now exploring the possibility of selling robotics solutions to industrial and consumer customers. So here you have two examples of places where Amazon is being a little bold, following its traditional playbook, but thinking bigger. And then, John, you alluded to the third that happened just this past week. Amazon announced a deal to acquire Globalstar, which is a satellite company that is essentially Apple's key partner on satellites, internet connectivity. When you inadvertently butt dialed on your iPhone, where were you when you did that?
I was in the Green River, on the Green River canyons. Yeah.
Not Seattle's Green River.
Not Seattle's Green River. No, I was Utah.
And when that went up to the satellite, I'm pretty sure that would have gone through a Global Star satellite, because that is the main technology that Apple is using for that service, the emergency 911 service and others. And Global Star is going to be acquired by Amazon. Amazon is effectively acquiring Apple's satellite roadmap, and a huge chunk of business from Apple in the process. This is part of its effort to compete with Starlink and Elon Musk. Those are just two examples, things that stood out to me on the Amazon beat lately that were different and a little bit contrary to the normal narrative about the company.
We really want the treasure truck back, though.
That's true.
That's when we know they're back into true experimental mode, is when the treasure truck is back.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's
No, it's not.
It's more ambitious, but it's really not all that fun. You know what I'm saying? I realize Wall Street doesn't care about that, but gosh, we do. I want to be chasing things down on the
robotics
street.
to industrial customers and satellites, and that seems seems like it's a little bit better business than the treasure truck concept.
Well, we'll see. See
how it plays out.
All right, so I will link to all of those stories, but just wanted to touch base briefly on that. And then one other story, John, and I think this was kind of the talker of the week. I've got a couple of friends, Tim and Matt, who text me about things, the news that happens during the week, and both of them were blowing up my phone about this news. Allbirds, the shoe company, John, announced Wednesday that it's pivoting to AI computing infrastructure. Tim Ellis's comment was another one that sounds like an April Fool's joke.
It's crazy. It's really crazy. I love some of the headlines on these stories. The New York Times said, sneaker company Allbirds plans to pivot to AI. Yes, AI. CNBC said, retail traders pile into Allbirds after odd AI pivot. History shows it won't end well. So this is companies pivot all the time. This is one I think is a bit strange, don't you?
It is. Now, a couple of things here. First off, Allbirds has essentially divested its shoe business. They sold it off. A company called American Exchange will keep selling products under the Allbirds name. So that's somewhat lost in those funny headlines. It's not as if Allbirds just immediately went to AI. It's clear that they've been headed towards something else for a while. And in this day and age, if you're going to do something else, it's probably going to be AI related. And then there is a big Amazon connection here. I don't know if you remember, John, the drama that happened. This was back in 2019 when Amazon launched what was a strikingly similar wool sneaker under its 206 Collective brand name. Man, this was a story.
I remember this, sure.
We made a lot of hay with this.
We had the story, which was kind of looking at the two. The headline was, we've been wearing Amazon's Allbirds lookalikes. Here's how they compare to the real thing.
I think I might still have my 206 Collectives somewhere in the basement. I pull them out when I have to, go trouncing around the yard in the mud and don't really care what I'm wearing. But my biggest memory of the 206 Collective was at the GeekWire Summit. I got to interview Jay Carney, who was the head of policy for Amazon at the time. And I purposefully wore 206 Collectives on stage. And I can't remember exactly how I did it, but it was a bit of a setup. I asked him how he liked my shoes and said, are you a fan of Allbirds? And well, in fact, these are Amazon 206 Collectives. I was kind of a gotcha. I didn't quite pull it off as smoothly as that, but but in some ways, this is kind of a comeuppance for Allbirds. The co-founder back in the day wrote an open Dear Mr. Bezos letter and challenged Amazon and basically said, hey, if you're going to copy us, you should copy Allbirds' sustainable materials. And he said, please steal our approach to sustainability. And so, I don't know, to see Allbirds come full circle here and essentially kind of copy Amazon's business in some ways by getting into AI and infrastructure, It's a little bit ironic.
Watch out, Amazon Kiro. They better watch out for Allbirds. They're coming.
All right. So those are a couple of Amazon related stories that caught my attention this week. But John, what I really want to do is coming up next, jump into our GeekWire Trivia Challenge. We'll be right back.
Pop quiz, hotshot.
This is GeekWire's Trivia Challenge.
Wouldn't you prefer a good game of chess?
All right, John. Yes, that's right. It is time for the GeekWire Trivia Challenge. Boy, I had fun doing this with Brad Smith last week. That was a highlight where the answer was his hometown. You caught that.
He nailed it.
He nailed it. He nailed it. All right. Earlier, John, we were talking about the GeekWire 200. The GeekWire 200 is our index of the Seattle region's and the Pacific Northwest's top startups. And it's been around for quite a while. In fact, I was doing some research. It started, I believe, in late 2012. So about a year and a half after GeekWire launched. I gave an assignment to Claude this afternoon before we started recording. And I don't want you to go look at the GeekWire 200 now because it'll give it away. I could see that you were going there. I could see you were going there. Actually, it doesn't really matter. I told Claude to go back through and to document all of the number ones that we've ever had on the GeekWire 200 going back to 2012. So I want to, in stages, challenge you to remember each of the number ones that we had. And I can give you little hints along the way. And with that, the first question in this special version of the GeekWire Trivia Challenge is, what was the first company that scored number one, the number one position on the GeekWire 200 back in December 2012? And I can give you some hints. I can tell you the industry.
Wow, that's tough.
It was a company in the gaming industry. It was a company that was later acquired.
Valve.
Nope.
No. Well, acquired. I didn't hear the acquired part there. Valve would have been interesting.
Yes.
Okay, not Valve.
I think Valve, but
PopCap.
Nope,
PopCap.
not PopCap. This is.
Oh my gosh. A gaming company that was later acquired that was number one.
It was acquired. It was acquired by a company that didn't really make a lot of sense to us at the time. It was a real head scratcher of an acquisition.
Oh, right. Okay, I got it. Yeah, it's when Churchill Downs acquired Big Fish Games.
That's right. Big Fish Games.
Yeah, Churchill Downs of horse racing fame.
Yes, that company, the company that runs Churchill Downs, the racetrack, acquired Big Fish Games in late 2014. But up until that point, from December 2012 to December 2014, Big Fish Games, number one on the GeekWire 200.
They had millions of users and still may in some whatever form they're at. I know they're no longer in their offices down in Pioneer Square. They had a beautiful office space down in Pioneer Square, and now that's the offices of DAT, the Freight and Analytics company.
Really? I didn't know that. Well, that was random trivia. How do you know that?
I visited them now.
Okay, nice. Okay.
Let's move on. That was a great question.
Okay, great. After Big Fish came a company that we always debated whether they were actually a Seattle company. And ultimately we decided, yes, we're going to claim them as one of our own, even if they say they're from the Bay Area now. Who then replaced Big Fish as the top company on the GeekWire 200?
Gosh, this is tough.
They were founded here, and they had and may still have, I'm sure they do still have, a large presence here. And in fact, I
remember this debate. I remember having this debate with you on whether they should be on the list or not. I need a clue.
Well, I just used their service, in fact, in the early part of this month to complete a specific task that people often do in early April with my accountant.
Well,
and one of their founders is pretty.
Avalera?
No. This is.
It's taxes.
No, it's not taxes. No, the thing that I did was related to my taxes, but it wasn't specific to taxes or exclusive to taxes.
I thought it would be specific to taxes.
It will be interesting.
Not Avalera. This is really fun, Todd.
Is it fun? I hope it's fun for listeners because it could be really bad. We'll see how this goes.
I don't know. I really don't know.
DocuSign.
Oh, right. I'm striking out. I should have a better sense of these.
Okay.
I think I know what the third one is, though.
Okay, let's cut straight to it. Who do you think is the next one?
I think it's Blue Origin.
Not wrong. There were two companies in between DocuSign and Blue Origin. Blue Origin came later. And in fact, Blue Origin holds a distinction on the GeekWire 200. We'll just cut straight to the chase. Blue Origin held the spot for longer than anybody. So.
And they eventually graduated out because we set essentially a term limit that companies that are 15 years or older are no longer eligible to be on the GeekWire 200. So we keep it fresh.
That's right.
Or if you get acquired or go public.
All right. The company that succeeded DocuSign on the list as the number one on the GeekWire 200 is someone whose CEO you and I always have a good time talking with.
Current CEO?
No, in fact.
Okay, I think I've pinpointed it then. I think it might have been Redfin.
That's right. Redfin was next.
The real estate company, yes. And the CEO is Glenn Kelman.
Okay, now the next one is one that you have mentioned already. So
now Redfin probably moved off the list because they went public.
Yes, departed via IPO. Okay, and next, you've already named this company after Redfin came.
I thought you said there were two companies between DocuSign and Blue Origin.
Yep. And so
Avalara.
Avalara. That's right.
Okay.
And then we've only got 4 left, John.
Well, we got Blue Origin, right?
Yes. So we got Blue Origin, and then 4 after that. I'm sorry. I assumed we knew Blue Origin was next. Okay. Yep. This is another company where it's like you look at them and you're like, oh man, do I really want to point to this company as the top company in the Pacific Northwest? It's a real debate because technically they weren't really in the Pacific Northwest. They were in the Pacific Southwest of their country. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, obviously, yeah. I'm following you. Obviously, a Vancouver, DC, or a British Columbia company.
Yes.
And gosh, I don't remember any BC companies being number one at any point.
Yeah, it was brief. Hootsuite.
Oh, Hootsuite. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
The social media management company. And that's one of those because one of the things about the GeekWire 200 is it helps us answer the question when people ask us randomly at lunch, what are the top companies in the Pacific Northwest? And you kind of
pull up the GeekWire 200. Let me look through the GeekWire 200. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And do you really want to go Hootsuite? No, you don't want to say Hootsuite. I mean, nothing against them, but you wouldn't hold them up as the flagship Seattle tech company. That's what I'm saying. And I recognize
because the list is broad. We should say the list is broader than Seattle. It's British Columbia, Washington State, Oregon, and to a degree, Idaho.
Yes. All right. And so next, we got 2 more to go. What followed Hootsuite? They are one of the companies in the Seattle region that has really distinguished themselves as a sales enablement platform. Not outreach. No, not outreach. I was just going to say outreach has never been number 1 on the list. They've been in the top 10, and I think they've graduated out since outreach has. So there's another sales enablement. John, they were the number 1 up until just a couple months ago, and they got acquired.
Oh, gosh, Todd. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Let me just say that
can't get it.
Their position in the top spot on the GeekWire 200 was very appropriate given their name.
Numero uno technologies.
No. High Spot.
Oh, High Spot. Yeah, High Spot. Yeah.
All right.
Boy, I'm struggling. I thought I'd be better at this.
I thought you would be too. It's hard to remember.
It is hard to remember.
I'm sure you know the current number 1. Oh no.
Oh my gosh. This is embarrassing.
Maybe we better cut this out.
Yeah, we better cut this.
The current number 1 is involved in the energy business.
Oh yeah, Helion.
Helion, yes.
Yeah, Helion.
Helion took the number 1 spot because High Spot was acquired by a private equity company, right? Seismic. And that is another milestone that takes you off of the GeekWire 200 because you've essentially had your exit. And you're not going to be pointing to that company as the next up and comer in the region. So there you have it, John. How'd you like that little twist on the typical trivia challenge?
I loved it. I am a little embarrassed at how poorly I did.
Well, I did not prep you. Obviously, I did not prep you. And I think this just goes to show why we usually do multiple choice. And keep it brief, too. I think both of those things have been proven by this counter example.
I mean, I found this to be really fun, even though I did really poorly.
Okay.
I liked the questions because they moved you around a little bit.
Yeah.
And they were historical in nature.
Yeah.
So
I think it's been fun kind of taking this journey through the startup community this week.
great conversation. Thanks, Todd. I look forward to hanging out with you back in Seattle.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Kurt Milton edited this episode. Until next time, I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop.
And I'm GeekWire co-founder John Cook.
We'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.